Hi, guys. This is our week 3 update for Social 30-1. So it'll be a bit longer than last week's just because there's quite a few bits of information I have to go through. So just bear with me, okay? Okay, so new school information. If you need something out of the school that you didn't get before out of your locker, or you need modules, or you need to drop something off, you have to call the school to make an appointment. It's completely locked for public access, and so this is for our safety and yours, and so just keep that in mind. There's still assessment information coming. As of right now, we've gotten some information about how we're expected to grade you within June, but it's not clearly defined yet. And so I'm still kind of going through that. But for those of you who missed exams or quizzes prior to the cancellation of classes, I'm going to contact you with a makeup assessment that you can complete for the mark. So this might be like an extra writing assignment or something like that. And it's kind of going to be on a case-by-case basis, so keep that in mind. For most of you in this class, you'll kind of have a choice. But for some of you, it'll be like, okay, yes, you need to take this specific assessment, okay? But I'll contact each of you individually. Okay, so our week 3 update. So this is Rack Your Brain. So you have 2 videos that I need you to watch. The mixed member proportional representation explained, and I leave the video link there. It's also in the Google Classroom, as well as the problem with first past the post voting. The chapter 10 PowerPoint slides 1 to 28, which is the proportional representation slide. So I've combined it all into this PowerPoint that I've then updated onto the Google Classroom. So it's up to you which one you want to use. You also need to read in the textbook pages 332 to 345. And then you need to and then read the article, How Will Coronavirus Change the World, from the BBC Future. We'll have another webinar on April 8th at 12 p.m. via Microsoft Teams. So I will send the invite on Tuesday. And after watching those videos, reading that article, complete the Google Doc, How Will Governments Respond to the COVID-19 Pandemic for the Future? And then hand that in by April 9th, okay? So please keep in mind that Friday is Good Friday, and so I'm not expecting you to do work on Friday. But you can, if you need to hand it in a little late, it's not a big deal. I'm not giving late marks right now. I just want to be able to assess you guys. Okay. So if you're overwhelmed, I get it. The reason that I messaged all of you who hadn't handed in yet on Friday is just because I wanted to touch base and make sure you're okay and you've handed and you have access and things like that. So by the end of this week, you should know different voting systems. You should know what the difference is between representational democracy, parliamentary democracy, and direct democracy is, and also consider how governments reflect the will of the people in democracies and liberalism. So I'm going to go through the PowerPoint and look at some key points for you, and make sure you look for that star again, okay? So party solidarity is the first thing I want you to kind of think about. So party solidarity is the concept that all party members must vote with the party, except in a rare instance where a party leadership frees them from this obligation. Usually that's like an ethic or morality thing, like on abortion or something like that, where they will give them a free vote. Not all the time, but sometimes, okay? Now, the question is, should MPs vote according to their party and their leader, or should they vote to the will of the constituents? The whole point of our democracy is that we elect representatives who are supposed to reflect our wills, so the will of the people. And so what if it conflicts? Who do you follow? Do you follow your constituents' will, or do you follow the will of the party? Mostly MPs vote with the party, but sometimes they take a stand. But that usually means that they're being forced out of the party or they have to leave voluntarily, which doesn't really seem fair either. So does the government serve the people or lead the people? And this is kind of an age-old question within democracy. Now in Canada, a party can often receive less than 50% of the votes, but then they still govern the country. So is that really governing according to the will of the people? And how do they decide what the will of the people is? Are there circumstances where a government should act contrary to public opinion? Is public opinion the right opinion? All those types of things. So the will of the people is generally based between 2 types of democracy, and we'll go over a third later on: direct democracy and representative democracy. So within direct democracy, every citizen's voice is important, and it seems practical only with small numbers of people. It requires people to meet, discuss, vote on issues. In Athens, there was only like 5,000 people in the assembly because you had to be like a male of a certain age, holding property, a citizen of Athens. Like it was very, very specific. It's not really realistic in today's world. There's 3 instruments of it. There's initiatives, excuse me. This is very prominent in the US. It's basically drawing up a petition. If it's signed by enough people, a public vote can be held. Referendums or plebiscites. So like we held a referendum to determine, the people of Quebec did, to determine if they should separate from Canada, or recalls. So if you choose to remove an elected official or government from power, you can have a recall of an election. It's very, very rare. So it doesn't often happen. Representative democracy, this is when you elect officials to make decisions on your behalf. So Canada has a parliamentary democracy and follows responsible government. So the branch of government that proposes laws, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Ministers, is dependent on the support of members in the legislative branch. And responsible government is all about accountability. So if they are not held accountable, then a vote of non-confidence can be held. And so usually that's on like matters of budgets, that they would be a vote of non-confidence. It doesn't happen very often, and it usually would only happen within a minority government because majority governments would just be able to pass it anyways. So here's some of the accountability: independent media, periodic elections, multiple parties, separation of power, rule of law, independent judiciary. All of these things make the elected representatives accountable to the law and to the people. So Canada's parliamentary democracy, our nation is divided into ridings or constituencies. So each riding has one representative that goes to the House of Commons, and that's a single member constituency. Now, this is it's usually called first past the post, because like in a horse race, basically the first person to pass a line, like the horse, the first person to pass a line gains a certain amount of votes. So basically counts however many people are in a riding, how they're likely to vote, and how many votes a candidate would need. And then it assumes, okay, once you've received this percentage of the vote, you win. Okay. So first past the post. So this is from the 2013 election in the city of Edmonton. So like Don Iveson had like almost 100,000 of the votes. Oh, there's Ben. Hi, Ben. So Don Iveson had 100,000 of the votes compared to everyone else who barely had anything. And so, but see down here, not all the voting stations had actually been reported yet, but they knew that he was going to win because he'd received so many votes. Now, Canada has a 2-chamber legislature, which basically means that we have the House of Commons and we have the Senate. The House of Commons is now 338 seats, which means there are 338 ridings within Canada, and they do their best to split them up as evenly as possible per population size. It's not always the case, but it's based on population. And these are MPs, members of parliament. They pass bills. It's the government and the opposition. Now, the Senate is separate. The Senate is 105 seats, and they are appointed by the Prime Minister. They are not elected by the people. Any bill that goes through the House has to be approved by the Senate, who can suggest amendments, or they can even stop it from being passed. Now, the US is a little different. The Constitution is technically above all, and then there are 3 different levels: legislative, executive, and judicial. Within the executive branch, you have the president and the vice president. So it's Donald Trump and Pence right now. Okay. Within the legislative branch, you have Congress, which is the House of Representatives. Sometimes they'll call Congress and the House of Representatives, like they'll just use the names interchangeably, but technically Congress is made up of the House and the Senate. And then they have the Supreme Court, which is the separate judicial court. Okay. Skip. I don't know why it's not going over. There we go. Okay. Within Canada, we have legislative, parliament, Senate, and the House of Commons. The executive, the Prime Minister, and the ministers are held accountable. They're in the House. And so the Prime Minister actually sits in the House in comparison to the United States, where the president doesn't actually sit in Congress. Okay, so the Prime Minister himself has to be elected within his riding in order to still be Prime Minister. If Trudeau, I think it's Gatineau, Quebec is his riding. So like, let's say he hadn't gotten elected in Gatineau, even though he was the leader of the party, like he has to be elected to still be the leader. Otherwise, they wouldn't really have confidence in him. Okay, and then we also have the Supreme Court as well. So Canada has a monarch. We have the Queen. Woo! And Fun fact, she just had her 4th ever special address to the nation via television just last night in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So it was an interesting little talk she had. She and Prince Philip, her husband, are currently in isolation. And so it's, anyways, it was interesting. She's only ever done it 4 times in the entire history of her reign. Okay. So the US has a Republican system of government. So a Republican has no king or queen. A republic has no king or queen. Okay. But we have a queen. So the 2 main differences in US, the senators are elected. They are elected separately from the House or from the House of Representatives or Congress. And like I said, the president does not sit in Congress. Okay. It is separate entirely. In Canada, senators are appointed by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister does sit in Parliament. And like I said, the Senate and the House are both referred to as Congress. So the Senate is equal representation. There's 100 representatives. Elections happen every 6 years. And it kind of depends on the year or if there's more Republicans or more Democrats in power. Right now, the Senate in the United States is controlled by the Republican Party. And so anything that happens within the Senate, even if it gets passed with a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, it probably wouldn't get passed within the Senate, depending on who's in power, okay? So the House of Representatives are voted in according to representation by population. There's 435 representatives, and each represent a congressional district, and elections happen every 2 years. And so it kind of gives some accountability there, but not all the time. Now, the president is the leader of the country and commander of the chief of the military, and the vice president is the president of the Senate. And so he kind of runs the Senate and becomes president if the president is unable to serve, like if he is killed or sick or something like that. The president appoints ambassadors, Supreme Court justices, federal judges, and any officials as provided for by the Congress, but they get approval from the Senate. And so the Senate definitely kind of works in favor of the president because generally the vice president and the president are on the same side. So the president has certain powers. He can convene Congress on extraordinary occasions, recommend legislation to Congress. He can also have veto power. And so we do not have this in Canada. So Congress makes the laws, but the president has to view it. So he has 3 options. He can veto the bill, he can sign the bill, or he can do nothing. There's a 10-day limit for Congress. So if within 10 days Congress is still meeting, then the bill becomes law automatically. And if within 10 days Congress adjourns, then the bill gets defeated. Okay. And so sometimes they actually will filibuster so that it's forced to get passed through. And then the Supreme Court, this is the last in the series of checks and balances. And so it's meant to be completely separate from the legislative or the executive branch. So how is the president elected? The president is not elected by popular vote. Each state has a number of electors who are selected either by the president himself or by caucus in the state Senate who represent the president in that state. So you vote for the electors. If in any state the president wins the most electoral votes, he wins the entire state seats. And so I'm going to show you a map of that. So this is all of the state seats. So like California has 55 electoral votes. Okay. Texas has 34. Where's New York? New York has 31. Florida has 27, things like that. Okay. So in the 2012 presidential election, when Barack Obama won, this is how it was split up. So blue is Democrat and red is Republican. In the 2016 Democratic results, which was Donald Trump, you can see that it's fairly similar. But Trump received 304 electoral votes and Hillary Clinton received 217 electoral votes. But she actually had the popular vote. She won the popular vote by I think like 3 million votes or something like that. Okay. And so that's kind of the interesting part of it. Okay, and this is the last one I'm going to do for today from here. So in proportional representation, as in Sweden, citizens vote directly for a party. And so this basically encourages and legitimizes participation because you're assigned to office based on the amount of popular support obtained. And so they're going to talk about this in the video a bit more with some of the problems of first past the post, So it's really beneficial for minority parties because in Canada, if you have with first past the post, even though the Green Party does generally get a fair number of votes, they usually don't get a seat because they had no chance of getting that past that post. But in this case, this basically creates it to be more representative because usually two parties have to join together to form the government, but it also ensures that, like, okay, so let's say the Green Party got 15% of vote. That means that 15% of the House is actually made up of Green Party representatives, which is kind of useful. Okay. So I do want you to watch these videos on mixed member proportional representation and the problem of first past the post. It's kind of funny. It's all based on like animal kingdom voting. Okay. Read the article, How Will Coronavirus Change the World? And then complete that Google Doc, like I said, and it'll be on your Google Classroom. And then that's due on April 9th. Webinar, again, I'll post the invite on Tuesday for you. You can do it on your phone or just listen, and I'll record it to post afterwards for you guys. And that's it. Have a good week. Email me if you have any questions. You can message me on Teams. You still will get assessed in June, like I mentioned before. And just keep in mind that this week is Holy Week and next weekend is Easter. And so please make sure you take some time to hang out with your family and just spend time this holiday because I know it's going to look a little different and it's going to be really weird. So just keep that in mind. And I'm thinking of you and I care about you guys. And there will be a special notice coming later today from the AOB staff. So we will see you guys soon. Bye.